Back again with my How the Holidays November update. I read 4 stories by Hal Clement, 2 of which are in the Essential Hal Clement Volume 2. The first one I read was called Proof, which was about these aliens who are composed entirely of energy, and they live inside the sun. And it is told almost entirely from the point of view of the aliens, and it was absolutely fascinating. One of the reasons that I love Hal Clement so much is because all of the science he is able to interject into his stories. He really goes to a lot of trouble to explain in detail how things are working in his stories. However, there are some really exceptional pieces that he has written, and Proof is one of them, which is a little bit surprising considering it was the first story he ever published. So in our story, we have a group of aliens on their way to a particular destination. I don't even know that the destination is identified, but it's a scientific expedition essentially. And the pilot is having a conversation with one of the passengers who, of course, is a scientist. And he begins to tell him about this strange encounter that he had on another one of his journeys. And in this encounter, he is describing a void in space that they have encountered that they have no explanation for. Well, what the void in space actually is matter, because matter does not exist in the world of these beings. They only are aware of energy and radiation. They have no concept of matter. It's essentially a myth. It doesn't exist. And so on this journey, what they encounter first is the atmosphere of Earth. And their energy compiled ships are fueled by radiation. And of course, once you hit the Earth's atmosphere, that supply of radiation is instantly cut off for the most part. So the ship, of course, loses power and crashes to the surface of the Earth. And chaos ensues. And at one point in the story, far into the story, it does switch a few times to the point of view of a human who is on the surface of the Earth and is witnessing this strange event that he has no explanation for. And by the end of the story, the scientist to whom he's telling this tale doesn't believe him. He thinks the guy is pulling his leg, essentially, and he makes some kind of comment to that effect, and it really, really made me laugh. So this story was absolutely fabulous. I just really, really liked it. It's probably in the top 3 of his stories that I have ever read. So if you are enjoying your Hal Clement stories, that is one to look up and definitely read. The next story I read out of this volume was called Impediment. This story surrounds a group of insect-like aliens who land on Earth looking for, I believe it was arsenic. They were looking for a particular substance to power their weapons, because in their society, things are very warlike or roguelike, if you will. They're sort of like everybody's kind of a pirate. It's like a pirate type of civilization. At least that's the impression that I received from the story. And when they land on the surface of the Earth, they come across a human. And they have to communicate with this human to see if this human can help them. And the main alien that we are exposed to in this story is called Talker, because he is the alien sort of designated and has the talent for communication with aliens. And the man he encounters is named Kirk. And Kirk is a young man. He's a college student. And unfortunately, communication is very, very difficult and slow going because the aliens all speak via telepathy. They all have some sort of telepathic communication. And of course, humans are verbal. And the aliens have absolutely no concept whatsoever of verbal communication. So we are taken through this very slow process of Talker and Kirk learning how to communicate with each other. And all the while, the aliens are pretty much dying off because they cannot withstand the pressure of our atmosphere. And in fact, their doctor is injecting them all with a drug that is designed to help them withstand that pressure, but it can't go on forever. Their bodies are breaking down the longer they're there. By the end of the story, it is revealed that the aliens are actually going to betray Kirk and the other humans in order to get what they need and leave the planet. Overall, I really, really, really enjoyed this story. I loved this idea of two alien species who do not conceptualize their environments in the same way, attempting to communicate with each other. However, I did have a couple of issues with it. One of them is since this was the second story he ever published, it wasn't as well written as a lot of his other stuff. Now, I felt Proof was better written than Impediment, but Proof was published first. However, my suspicion is that he probably wrote this before Proof because of the difference in how well the ideas were laid out and how well the stories were written. It was a little bit disjointed. It's not a story killer at all. You will still absolutely love the story if you read it. It's great, but it's a noticeable flaw in the story. The other small complaint I had was about Kirk. Kirk was not entirely believable as a character. Everything was fine with Kirk until we get towards the end. And then once you get to the end, he gives this very long speech to the aliens about why it is that they are essentially immoral in his eyes because they don't understand our sense of morality, a human sense of morality. And during the speech, he describes a lot of intricate language and thought processes and other things that are just way beyond what has been implied as his level of education. So I was not believing that he would know all of that stuff. There was never any indication that he would be that learned. So I wasn't buying that. And then I wasn't completely buying some of the interactions between Talker and Kirk because the language is not, or the communication rather, is not great. Like, it is difficult for them to communicate. And so some of the concepts or sentences that Kirk forms when he's speaking with Talker seem more complex than what Talker should be able to understand, especially when you get to that speech. There's no way Talker could understand all of the things he was talking about in the speech because their communications all the way through are quite basic. And it's clear that there's a lot of sort of misconceptions happening with the way that they speak, and they each have to be very careful while they're interpreting what the other one is saying. But like I said, overall, absolutely loved the story if you want to track it down and read it. The next story I read can be found in this book called Medea, Harlan's World, which is a world created by Harlan Ellison that is set in the far future, where humans have colonized this planet called Medea. And Harlan created this world and got together with a group of other science fiction writers of his day, and they all sort of solidified this planet, created the science, the lore, the creatures, all of that stuff. And then they all wrote a story based on this planet. And there's quite a few of them. As you can see, I have them all tabbed off here. And Hal's story is called Seasoning, which is about a man who is on a journey to find some survivors of a crashed ship from his colony. And Medea is not particularly hospitable to humans. And in fact, humans have had to sort of do a little bit of genetic adaptation in order to survive there. So this journey is very arduous. However, he does have an artificial intelligence called Beatty. And Beatty is an extremely old artificial intelligence. The implication is that he is hundreds of thousands of years old. And Beatty is essentially a prism crystal. And he's very, very dark, like he's almost black. And he's very small, and he fits on a little wristwatch size device that the man wears and takes with him everywhere. So Beatty is always, always present. And there's only been a handful of these little AI prisms found, and nobody knows who made them or exactly how old they are. Not even Beatty himself knows that. And as they are on this journey looking for these survivors, Beatty starts acting very strangely and starts saying a lot of things that are out of characteristic for him. And the man notices, but he just ignores it and goes on because he is essentially so used to relying on Beatty's guidance that he really doesn't think too much about it. But towards the end of the story, he does start getting a little bit more suspicious, but again, he disregards it, and Beatty leads him into a situation where he is going to die. So the man essentially sets him loose, and I can't remember exactly what he did, but something to where Beatty would float off into the sky, which is exactly what Beatty was trying to accomplish in the first place, because Beatty's main drive is to learn and explore and gather data. And that takes prevalence over anything else, even human life. So he had manipulated this man into this situation where he's going to die in order to accomplish this goal. But the man does end up surviving and making it home. And I really, really, really liked this story a lot. It was a bit of an adventure, although I will say it was a slow adventure, but it does build quite steadily all the way to that ending. So even though it wasn't a favorite, it was definitely a really good read for me. I then read Blot, which can be found in this anthology of short stories that were written by various authors and set in Isaac Asimov's robot world. It's called Foundation's Friends. And this story takes place on a planet completely covered in ice. And they are gathering data and trying to figure out certain things about the planet. And at some point they detect another signal, and they have a suspicion that it is some type of data collecting device placed there by an alien race. So a group of them head over to this device to try to retrieve it, and they bring their robot with them. And once they get there, they have the robot pick up the device to carry it back to the base. But they don't get very far before another robot shows up and stops them and retrieves the device and brings it back to the spot where it was originally. And this robot is essentially a mirror image of the human's robot. And the alien robot and the human robot have a conflict. And the entire time the humans are trying to figure out how to access the information without moving the device and triggering the alien robot. And there really wasn't very much science in it at all. And that is the whole reason I read Hal, is because he has such great science in his stories, and he has such a wonderful imagination that he imagines all these environments and aliens and ways of communicating and all kinds of things that I'm absolutely in love with. But this one just didn't have any of those things. It was just a regular run-of-the-mill story. The only real science that you get in the story is a detailed view of how the gravity works there. And there is much less gravity on this planet than there is on Earth. So when the researchers jump or push off of anything, they float, and then very slowly, and then they come back down very slowly. So everything, even though there is a conflict happening, it's very, very slow. Everything happens very, very slowly. So the story was okay. It was fine. But it definitely was not my favorite, and I was a little let down by the fact that there wasn't any science in it. So those are all my November Hals. December, I will be reading all of the Mescaline stories, which are included in the Essential Hal Clement Volume 3. So all of the Mescaline stories are Mission of Gravity, Starlight, which are like short books. I believe they're about 250 pages apiece. And then there are a couple of short stories. One is called Lecture Demonstration, and the other one is called Under. So that is all of the Mescaline stories, in case you yourself want to read them all. And so I'll report back in later on in the month when I've read all these. And I'll call that the end of the video.